Charles Hughes, former managing director of TruCape, largest marketer of apples and pears. I've heard of apples and oranges being compared, but apples and pears, is it such a big market for South Africa?
How big a market is it for South Africa is a good question. South Africa represents only 3% of world production. Okay, so relatively small in terms of the overall global position. However, it's still a substantive player. The South African apple and pear industry brings in about 7 billion rand a year in forex.
That's quite a big income for South Africa. It's not to be sneezed at.
No, it's substantive, and it represents probably in the region of about 30% of agricultural exports out of the country.
And employment-wise in this country, what does it employ? What does it give employment to?
Well, in terms of employment, what you're looking at, there's two sections. There's your permanent staff who live permanently on the farms and are also permanently staffed at the packing facilities. Then there's the seasonal workers. So you're probably looking in the region of around 20,000 families just in the Western Cape.
Before we go any further, let's talk about those seasonal workers, because it's caused great controversy in the last year or so, as we well know, especially in Dodooans and places like that. That's mostly with the grape farmers. But from your point of view, are you having the same problems within the fruit business?
When we had the problems last year in the Dodooans area, it did spill over into the pome industry or apple and pear industry as well. I think though that it has settled down, and I think people generally have come to some agreement on that. You had two issues. One, the minimum wage was set by the government, and two, there's some confusion within this industry whether or not people are paying only the minimum or whether they're doing better than the minimum.
Well, that's why I brought the seasonal workers up and wanted to clear it with you, because you obviously employ a lot of seasonal workers. That's when the crop is ready, they come and pick it.
Correct.
Now, the market didn't understand that. A lot of people sitting in a township, for instance, in Soweto, wouldn't understand that seasonal employment. They see them as employees only, and that's what is being played upon.
Yeah, that is true. But I also come back to the seasonal workers, that even on the major farming, particularly in the pome industry, it has been proven that minimum wage was better, they were paid better than minimum wage, and the conditions in which they lived on the farms was a lot better. So in my view, it's relatively isolated in that. I think it had to happen, unfortunately. I think it was not a great thing for the economy, and I think it damaged South Africa's position in the international markets. But I think it reached a position where at least there's proper discussion around it. One of the things I think that this country missed out on as an opportunity at the time when there was this unrest, instead of the industry and government and two issues of government fighting amongst each other, there was an ideal opportunity for those members that were making a lot of the noise to have gone overseas as a group, government and industry, and go talk to the world and tell them that South Africa is no longer a source of cheap labor and cheap product.
And you're saying it didn't do that?
They didn't do that.
Who's to blame?
Both industry and government. Because they were so infighting with each other that nobody stopped for a moment to think, but Charles, can we use this as an opportunity?
How do we get over this hurdle? And it seems to be a hurdle. He said this, she said that, he didn't do this, he didn't do that. I mean, it's almost childish to the onlooker.
Correct. I absolutely 100% agree with that. And you know what is amazing, Tony? That during the time that this was taking place, do you know that there was hardly a word was said overseas about the problem in South Africa? The international buyers did not want to be exposed to it, and they were looking at alternatives to say, if this continues and we lose the South African supply base, can we substitute elsewhere? Most of the major importers were talking to Brazil, Argentina and Chile, New Zealand and Australia a lot closer to make sure that their supply base was not going to be eroded.
If they're going to come into our market and offer more economic value to the buyer, surely that's the thing that's going to affect. And if we bring our labour market up to what it expects, we put ourselves out of that economic circle.
No, I disagree with that entirely. Because what you found in the other Southern Hemisphere countries, they've also had labour issues, and they've also had to increase their basic labour wages. And I think Chile, if I'm correct, went up something like 165%. So they were still able to compete in the world market, maybe to a lesser degree. But if you've got a shortage of supply and you're sitting in pretend United Kingdom and you pretend one of the big supermarkets, you're going to need supply base. You will find it, and you will end up paying the market-related value for it. My point I'm trying to get to is, why can't that market-related value be here and ensure that the labour force in this country is uplifted? That is my point.
Let's talk about the obvious market that is now available to South Africa, China.
Let's talk about China. That's interesting. The China market at the moment has only access for South Africa for citrus and for grapes. And even though China, which by the way is not the biggest importing fruit and veg country in the world, Russia is, China still imports around 1 to 1.2 million tons of produce from the world every year. At the moment, the apple industry has no access to that market. It's work in progress, and it has been for some 9, 10, 11 years, I think. You must also understand that even though you look at China as a massive opportunity, the massive opportunity is also restricted in its own ability to consume that amount of import product and the timing thereof, and the range of product that we produce. So South Africa, unfortunately, does not produce enough of the varietals that the Chinese market needs. That's its problem in the short term. In the longer term, as the new plantings will come into fruition with the varieties which they prefer, like Fuji apples, which is a classic example, then that opportunity will expand. But then it's also not an easy market to trade in. The younger generation Chinese has moved away from the traditional family small farming unit of maybe 1/3 of a hectare or whatever, and has gone into the major cities. That's why you've seen this massive growth, Shanghai, Shandong, Shenzhen. What has happened is, those collective villages where the local mayor becomes, you can, inverted commas, put the head of the cooperative, has now had to expand those farms into bigger collective units. So now in China, particularly in the apple growing regions, you'll find that those smaller farming units are disappearing, and you've got a bigger collective individual farming unit.
That's communism.
It's socialist capitalism.
Yes.
Okay, and it works exceptionally well.
I think you're being kind.
No, it does work very well. It has always been my view that your best method in this is to have a collaborative arrangement between government and the industry. Now, let me explain that. You create a joint venture company, right, government and industry, and say, what we need to do here, we need to expand the agricultural business into previously disadvantaged people. You can't just put them on an apple farm. It'll be bankrupt in a year. What you've got to do is mentor. So government provides the funding, the industry provides the infrastructure.
In other words, you're talking about going back to the old corporati situation in some respects.
Well, yes and no. Yes, in the sense that what you're going to do with it. All right, let's create
communalism.
Well, let's create a scenario. You come along and you decide you want to be in the apple industry. All right, government says that's fine. We're going to have to help you buy the land. You go to the industry and say, what farms are available for this particular individual? Point one. Government will help to provide the finance. Industry says, fine. What do we have to do? Normally, if you're in a big production company, your cost of entry would have some sort of share value, because obviously there's infrastructure there, there's bins, there's cold stores, there's all these various items that come into the equation. So you mentor them and say, you can have free entry into that business, no cost of entry, but conditional that individual stays with that business for a minimum period, which is the mentorship period, where that business can then help, assist, and train them to do exactly what is required to make them successful in time.
We were actually discussing that very subject this morning, funny enough, because there are many people who believe that the ratio of black ownership, Indian coloured, and so on, is askew in the country, and especially in the Western Cape. But you can't just give over a going concern and allow it to become a mediocre concern. And that is not saying that the intelligence or the skills aren't there, but the experience isn't there.
That's your problem. But there's something else. There's not enough young people coming into agriculture through the universities, through the training colleges.
This is what I'm coming to, yes.
Because it is not seen to be sexy. Now, and I'm serious about this. It's not.
a lawyer, a doctor,
It's the sort of
a
image.
broadcaster.
Yeah. What are you?
Yeah.
I'm an apple farmer. You know.
Yeah, sure.
I mean, I'm just using it as an example. So there needs to be a drive again from government through the education process to try and bring these people in with bursaries and get them into agriculture.
Now, I'm going to pick on you here a little bit, Charles, and I'm going to be a little bit hard on you on this one. Everybody says it's government should be doing this and government should be doing that. Now, I'm not any friend of the government, so I'm doing this completely impartially. Isn't business also responsible for some publicity and some making it a little bit sexy, creating some promotional things? I hear nothing from the fruit guys, nothing.
The question as to whether the industry should be actively involved in it is very valid. For many years, the industry was doing sponsorships or trying to encourage people to come into it, and it hasn't happened. I think you've got to expand it further and say that it's not only the local schools that you need to do it, you need to expand it beyond that. And I don't think there's enough, and again, I'm saying through government, promoting through the Ministry of Agriculture at educational level to say there is a wonderful opportunity to expand into agriculture for the future and get the kids involved at that level nationally.